Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today's episode is going to be a $50 deck tech. When I say $50, I mean that is an overall deck cost. Both shipping and commanders that are $10 or less are going to be included in that cost, but basic lands will not be. Decks on this channel are built to be fun, inexpensive, and focused. If you want to learn more about what a focused commander deck is, check out this video here. On this deck tech, I'm going to take you through its strategy, the tactics, and how this deck wins. This show and episodes like this one are possible because of viewers like you. So if you're looking for some easy ways to help support the show, make sure you like this episode and share it with friends. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Another easy way to support this channel is by using our TCG Player affiliate links. So make sure that you're looking for those links in the description whenever you're buying a deck or just individual cards. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Today's deck tech comes to you courtesy of Trenton. Trenton has been supporting this show for over a year now as a general tier patron. I really couldn't do this without amazing patrons like Trenton. And today, Trenton's going to handle the intro for me.
Hey Mitch, it's Trenton from Homer, Alaska. For my personalized deck tech, I'd like to see you build around Halar the Firefletcher. I want to see you focus on counters and kicker spells so we can build them up as fast as possible and drain out our opponents even faster.
So as Trenton said, today's deck techs can be built around Halar the Firefletcher, and it's going to focus on +1/+1 counters and kicker spells. Halar is a 3/3 elf archer with trample that costs 1 red-green. It also has, whenever you cast a spell, if that spell is kicked, put a +1/+1 counter on Halar, then Halar deals damage equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on it to each opponent. So the more counters that we get on Halar, the more damage it does to everyone else when we kick a spell. Now there's definitely a lack of spells that are very effective that have kicker. So like Trenton said, we're going to supplement that by getting counters on it in other ways. So our strategy for this deck is very straightforward. We're going to get +1/+1 counters onto Halar in multiple ways. These can either be one-shot effects or effects that happen over time, but again, the more counters we got on Halar, the better. And then how do we win with this deck? Well, we're going to kick spells to deal massive damage to all opponents. By kicking multiple spells in one turn, we can even finish off all of our opponents at once. As with all Commander's Quarters decks, I'm going to take you through 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how we're going to win with it. So it's time to start things off with tactic number 1, Ignite the Fire. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to get a basic land and play tapped. Next up, we've got Farseek, Rampant Growth, and Edge of Autumn, which each ramp us by 1 and they cost 2. Farseek's going to get us a mountain into play tapped. And then Rampant Growth and Edge of Autumn can get either of our basic lands into play tapped. And then we're running Sakura Tribe Elder, which we can sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. Next up, we've got Gruul Signet, which we can pay 1 and 2 and tap it for red-green. And then we're running Elfhame Druid, which we can tap for a green or can tap for a green-green, but we can only spend that mana to cast kick spells. And finally, we're running 3 ramp spells that we can actually kick with Everflowing Chalice, Grow from the Ashes, and Primal Growth. Everflowing Chalice essentially can tap for half the amount of mana that we put into it. Grow from the Ashes gets us 1 basic land into play untapped or 2 if we kicked it. And Primal Growth does the exact same thing, but its kicker cost is sacrificing a creature. Our commander's got a very low cost, so we want to make sure that our ramp has a low cost too. But after we get our commander out, what are we going to do? Let's go through some ways to get some counters on Halar, and tactic number 2, start counting. Now saying +1/+1 counter is going to get a bit repetitive, so instead of that, I'm just going to say counters when I'm referring to them, okay? So first up, there's Blessings of Nature, which is going to give 4 counters to Halar. On top of that, it's got a miracle cost for a green, so we can get a huge value if it's the first card that we draw in a turn. And then Verdurous Gearhulk is a 4/4 trample that also puts 4 counters on Halar. Next up, there's Increasing Savagery, which is going to put 5 counters on Halar, or 10 if we flashed it back. Now 10 is a lot, but Soul's Might can get even more counters on Halar. It's going to put X counters on target creature, where X is that creature's power. So this is going to more than double the number of counters on Halar. But a card that actually doubles the number of counters on Halar is Solidarity of Heroes. And at just 2 mana and instant speed, this can be a very valuable card. But perhaps the most valuable card in this deck is our Golden Pig, which is the number 1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Hardened Scales. It's an enchantment for a green, and it says if 1 or more counters we put on a creature you control, that many +1 counters are put on it instead. The incremental value that we get throughout the game with this can be huge. It's something that we can get down really early and just provides us value throughout the game just by sitting there. Now these one-shot effects that we just went over are only going to get us 1 extra counter each time that we cast them, but that's still a good amount of value. We've got a lot of other ways to get counters on Halar, and this makes those ways even more effective. But what actually are some of those ways? Let's go over them now in tactic number 3, keep counting. First up, we're running Predatory Hunger, Forced Adaptation, and Loyal Guardian. Predatory Hunger is going to get a counter on Halar every single time an opponent casts a creature spell. So depending on the decks that we're playing against, this can get us a ton of counters very quickly. And then Forced Adaptation gets Halar a counter on each of our upkeeps. And then Loyal Guardian is similar but in a bigger way. It has Lieutenant. At the beginning of combat in your turn, if you control your commander, put a counter on each creature you control. So not only does this grow our commander, but it grows the rest of our team as well. Next up, we've got some ways to get multiple counters each turn. We can tap Immaculate Magistrate to put 2 counters on Halar. And then Evolutionary Escalation says at the beginning of your upkeep, put 3 counters on target creature you control and 3 counters on target creature an opponent controls. So this will grow one of our opponent's creatures too, but we're willing to make that trade. And Forgotten Ancient can get a ton of counters on Halar too. It says whenever a player casts a spell, you may put a counter on Forgotten Ancient. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may move any number of counters from Forgotten Ancient onto other creatures. Next up, we've got some equipment that can help us out as well with Blade of the Blood Chief, Ring of Colonia, and Ring of Valkis. Blade of the Blood Chief will give one counter to Halar every single time a creature dies. And then the rings are going to give Halar a counter on each of our upkeeps. Ring of Valkis even gives Halar haste, which can be relevant. Next up, we've got some ways to give more counters based on lands coming into play. For each land that comes into play under our control, Retreat to Kazandu is going to put a counter on Halar. And then Evolutionary Sage says, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. So this can even get counters on our other creatures that already have counters too. Next up, there's Rite of Passage, which benefits us whenever Halar takes damage, because it says whenever a creature you control is dealt damage, put a counter on it. So if we're attacking or blocking with Halar, we can benefit from that, or we can benefit from any damage spells too. And finally, there's Death's Presence, which can be a great insurance policy for this deck. It says whenever a creature you control dies, put X counters on target creature you control, where X is the power of that creature that died. So if Halar dies, we can put a ton of counters on another creature we control. Conversely, if our other creatures die, we can put more counters on Halar. Now, after we get all these counters on Halar though, what are we going to do? Let's go through our next step in tactic number 4. Kickstart my heart. First up, we've got some very cheap kicker spells with Goblin Bushwhacker, Savage Offensive, and Scorching Lava. Like I mentioned before, there aren't a ton of really effective kicker spells in Magic, but Halar can definitely benefit from having a lot of cheap ones, because once we're set up and we've got a ton of counters on Halar, we can do a lot of damage to our opponents all at once by kicking multiple spells. Next up, there's Vines of the Vastwood, which is not only a cheap kicker spell, but a very effective one. It says target creature can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control this turn, and if this spell was kicked, that creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. So this protects Halar on top of pumping it. And then there's Strength of the Tadgeru, which is a fantastic way to get counters on Halar while kicking a spell. Now we can use this to get more counters on other creatures too, but most of the time we're just going to be focusing on Halar. Next up, there's Wolfbriar Elemental, which can be an effective card on its own. It has multi-kicker for a green, and when it enters the battlefield, we create a 2/2 green wolf creature token for each time it was kicked. So if we need a backup plan, we can always create an army of wolves. And then we're running Get To Chronicler, which has a pretty high kicker cost. It does have the benefit though that when we kick it, we get to return target instant or sorcery card from our graveyard to our hand. So this can actually be a good way to recur one of our other kicker cards too. Finally, we've got some kicker spells that deal with our opponent's permanents like Overload, Verdurant Emissary, and Mold Shambler. Overload and Verdurant Emissary are going to deal with an artifact, and Mold Shambler can deal with any non-creature permanent. So some of these kicker spells have a decent amount of utility on top of helping us deal damage to our opponents. We've got some spells that might not be kicker spells but have even more utility. So let's go over them now in tactic number 5, Utility Belt. First up, there's Beast Within, which is going to destroy any target permanent in exchange for a 3/3 beast. This is a fantastic spell that can deal with pretty much anything, and it's an easy trade-off for us to make. Next up, there's Shared Summons, which is a great card in this deck. It says search your library for up to 2 creature cards with different names, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. So we can use this to get something that can help our commander with counters, or we can use it to get a kicker spell or two. This is just a very flexible card for us. On top of that, we can cast this at instant speed, so it can really come out of nowhere and really hurt our opponents. And another way to deal a ton of damage to our opponents comes with Strionic Resonator. We can pay 2 and tap it to copy target triggered ability we control, and we can choose new targets for the copy. So essentially this lets us copy a lot of our triggered abilities, especially Halar's. Basically, whenever we cast a kicker spell, we can just pay 2 and tap this to double up Halar's damage. This is a fantastic, repeatable resource that can really help us finish out a game quickly. But we've got some other ways to help finish out games quickly too. Let's go over them now in tactic number 6, Double Trouble. First up, there's Gratuitous Violence, which says if a creature you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. So now every single time that we kick Halar, he deals even more damage to all of our opponents. And this even helps if we decide to attack with Halar as well. We're even going to be running Dictate of the Twin Gods, which has flash and says if a source would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. Now this will help out our opponents, but since it has flash, it's going to help us out first. This can be a great way to set us up for a big explosive turn that can finish off everyone else. But how are we going to get to all these great cards? Let's go through some ways to dig through our deck in tactic number 7, Fuel for the Fire. First up, this Cathartic Reunion, which at the cost of discarding 2 cards is going to draw us 3. So it can provide us some card advantage on top of helping us ditch any dead cards in our hand. Another solid but very simple draw spell is Harmonize, which is going to draw us 3 cards for 4 mana. Next up, we've got some ways to draw cards through damage with Snake Umbra and Hunter's Insight. Snake Umbra says, enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has, whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. On top of that, it's got Totem Armor, so it's going to protect our commander. But with this on Halar, essentially whenever we cast a kicker spell, we're drawing 3 cards. And then Hunter's Insight says, choose target creature you control, whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker this turn, draw that many cards. So this is only based on combat damage, but it can draw us a ton of cards when we get Halar through. Some cards that aren't dependent on combat are Soul's Majesty, Return of the Wild Speaker, and Rishkar's Expertise. Each of these can essentially draw us a ton of cards at once equal to Halar's power. And Return of the Wild Speaker can actually pump our team by +3/+3 if we need it. Rishkar's Expertise even gives us the added benefit of allowing us to cast a card with converted mana cost of 5 or less from our hand without paying its cost. And finally, we've got 2 temporary card advantage engines with Outpost Siege and Vance's Blasting Cannons. If we choose cons, Outpost Siege says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library until the end of the turn you may play that card. Vance's Blasting Cannons is very similar, it does the same thing, but it can only be a non-land card. Regardless, both can be very effective at getting us access to an extra card each turn. Outside of drawing cards, we've even got some ways to get some cards back. So let's go through those ways now in tactic number 8. Let's try that again. First up, there's Regrowth, which is a very simple spell. It's going to get us one card back from our graveyard to our hand. This is a very cheap and efficient way of getting us back the card that we need. A bigger way to get more cards back, though, is with Wildest Dreams. It costs XX and a green, and it says return X target cards from your graveyard to your hand, exile Wildest Dreams. And an even cheaper way to get a ton of cards back is with Reap the Past. It says return X cards at random from your graveyard to your hand, exile Reap the Past. Although the cards are random, this can be a huge value for us. But on top of doing all this, we need to make sure that we can actually protect our commander. So let's go over some ways to do that in tactic number 9, Fire Safety. First up, there's Swiftfoot Boots, which is going to give Halar Hexproof and Haste. Now, Haste can definitely come in handy, but Hexproof can be huge. Next up, we're running Sworeback Troll and Temur Sabertooth. Sworeback Troll has Graph too, so we can actually move one of its counters onto Halar when Halar comes into play. On top of that, we can pay 1 and a green to regenerate target creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. And then Temur Sabertooth has pay 1 and a green, you may return another creature you control to its owner's hand. If you do, Temur Sabertooth gains indestructible until end of turn. So we can use this to balance creatures that we can kick or creatures with ETBs. And if we're desperate, we can use this to balance our commander as well. But a great way to keep our commander in play is with Inspiring Call. It says draw a card for each creature you control with a counter on it. Those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. So this can save multiple creatures including our commander and draw us a good amount of cards. But on top of protecting our things, we can also deal with our opponent's things in a big way too. So it's time for us to move on to our final tactic, tactic number 10, Kick in the Head. First up, there's Breath of Dargars, which is going to deal 1 damage to each creature without flying in each player. But on top of that, it's got Kicker for 2, and if we kicked it, it deals 4 damage to each creature without flying in each player instead. This is a fantastic and cheap way to get rid of a lot of small creatures and also deal damage to our opponents. Some bigger ways to deal damage, though, come from Comet Storm and Molten Disaster. Comet Storm has multi-kicker 1 and says choose target creature or player, then choose another target creature or player for each time Comet Storm was kicked. Comet Storm deals X damage to each of them. And Molten Disaster has kicker for a red, and if it was kicked, it has split second. It deals X damage to each creature without flying and each player. So all these can be great ways to help us control the board, on top of dealing out a ton of damage with our commander and with these spells. Again, we need to be careful with the kicker spells that we're choosing for this deck. By choosing the right balance of +1/+1 counter spells and kicker spells, we can make this deck very effective. Again, a huge thanks to Trenton for supporting this channel for over a year now as a general tier patron. If you want to support this channel or want your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you, consider becoming a patron. But now that we've gone through the spells in this deck, let's go on to the mana base. First up, there's Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which we can tap and sacrifice, search our library for a base land, and put in play tapped. Next up, there's Rogue's Passage, which can tap for our colors, so we can pay 4 and tap in, and target creature can't be blocked this turn. And then we've got Forge of Heroes, Guildmage's 4 and Noble Palace, which can each put a counter or counters onto Halar when it comes into play. Next up, there's Ornreath the Vastwood, which enters the battlefield tapped, taps for a green, and we can tap it to play a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that enters the battlefield this turn. And then there's Llanowar Reborn, which enters the battlefield tapped, can tap for a green, and has Graft 1. Next up, we've got 6 lands that each enter the battlefield tapped and tap for either of our colors. And finally, we've got 22 basic lands, 16 of those are going to be a forest, and 6 will be a mountain. And now that we've gone through every single card in this deck, let's do a quick price check. A quick reminder that our deck costs are calculated using TCG Player Optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. The average Halar EDH Rec deck will set you back $98.30. Our deck is going to be more affordable, coming in at $49.80. Again, the price of this deck is the price that I got for it on the day that I'm recording. If you want to see a breakdown of this deck's cost, check out the link in the description. Keep in mind that prices can and will fluctuate and change over time. But with these deck costs, I want to be as transparent as I possibly can. Again, Commander's Quarters decks are built to be tuned and focused within their budget, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. So let's go through some reasonable upgrades now to see what some of those ways just might be. First up, let's upgrade this deck by adding in Karn's Bastion and taking out a forest. Next up, let's add in Lightning Greaves and take out Sworeback Troll. And then we're going to put in Pier, Imaginative Rascal, and take out Forced Adaptation. Next up, let's add in Keen Sense and take out Loyal Guardian. And then let's add in Grafted Exoskeleton while taking out Gitu Chronicler. Finally, we're going to add in Chandra's Ignition by taking out Wolfbriar Elemental. And now it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what you think about this deck and what you think about the commander in general. And make sure that you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.